Let me ask you this. Do you ever feel like, as a leader, parent, founder, that you're the strongest person in every room, but it simultaneously feels like you're almost carrying everybody's burdens, responsibilities, emotions on your shoulders? Did you ever wonder, why is it that maybe you can gain success in your career, in your business, but when it comes to your relationships, you're finding that can actually be super draining for you, and you just haven't figured that out yet? And you just keep telling yourself that maybe I just care a lot, and somehow you always end up being resentful. If that's you, then chances are you've been through something similar to what I've experienced and what a lot of my clients and a lot of people that I've spoken to recently that come to me for this specific issue have experienced as well. And like I said, you might be someone who is a founder, a leader, parent, coach. Like, these are typically some of the people who just seem to have, I would describe it as being responsibilities where they have to have really strong relationship skills, communication skills, and somehow it's not working for you and for them, right? And that's exactly what I experienced as well. And so we've got a lot to go through in this video today, as you can see on my whiteboard, and we've got some stuff on the back there as well. It's going to be jam-packed with value, so make sure that you grab your notepad and pen. And the whole idea for the video is I want you to walk away so that by the end of it, you will be able to go from being somebody who really has struggled in some difficult relationships under pressure, because it's all well and good being somebody who can be within a relationship, a friendship, when it's easy. You're just having surface level conversations. You're not taking on any responsibilities shared together, anything like that. But when we're talking about leading a team or being in a business or being married, like having a significant commitment, this is when it becomes a lot more difficult. So you'll know what I'm talking about if you've already experienced this, right? So you'll find this super relatable. But by the end of this video, I'm going to take you from being that person who feels as though you're always having to clean up the mess in the relationship to becoming the person that genuinely feels like, wow, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm so grateful that I'm in this position where other people are almost coming to me for help, etc., things like that, to where I'm sort of at right now with this, which is wild. Because my story, real quick, when it came to this particular issue and domain, it was like over the last 12 months to a year, I experienced going from being somebody who for maybe about 3 to 4 years was very independent. So that meant that I was a solopreneur. It meant that I was working remotely. It meant that I'd play sports, and if I was playing sports, then the sports that I'd play would be independent sports like tennis and badminton and running and being in the gym. So I was a very independent person, very introverted. And then out of nowhere, like my business exploded. So what ended up happening was I went from being somebody who didn't need to speak with people, have communication and conversations and build relationships, etc., to then becoming someone who had an organization of people that were coming to me for either help or support or leadership. And nobody had ever taught me really how to deal with relationships and how to communicate well. So everything that I'm actually teaching you right now, it's not stuff that I've learned so much so from books. Yes, some of it has come from that, as you can see. I read quite a bit of books, and there's a lot more behind the screen as well. But I would say that the majority of this has actually come from lived experience of me just simply experiencing the pain of going through relationships and business and partnerships that started off as toxic, some of them that ended up dissipating, and some of them which have actually gone on to now have gone through that toxicity and that difficult period and have fully healed. And now it's an even better, stronger relationship than it was prior, when it was all fine and healthy, right? So I'm sharing this from experience, and it's worked for me, which is why I personally believe if you're watching this right now as well, you take on some of these concepts that I'm going to share today as well, it's going to work for you too, and going to work wonders. So, yeah, I mean, the best way I can sort of describe this epiphany that I've had over here. And not all of this is stuff that I've come up with by myself. It's things that you'll learn more about if you ever go to a therapist, a counselor, somebody who's a relationship expert, psychologist, whatever it is. Like, you'll be able to learn some of these concepts here too. But what I'm going to be teaching is probably in a way that you've never heard about it before, right? So there's going to be some concepts that I've personally even created for myself. And so the first thing to understand when it comes to like just any relationship that you're in, whether it is a business relationship, whether it is a partnership, or whether it's a relationship which is, between you and a close friend, first thing to understand is that there is a basis for that relationship. And depending on what the basis is, the underlying energy theme, the current, the power mechanism, whatever it is will determine the quality of that relationship, right? And so if the relationship is founded up upon, as an analogy, you could think about it, it's like the roots of the relationship, the seeds were planted, and it could have been fear. There was those seeds. And so if fear is the roots, then the fruits, which is the fulfilled roots, will just become fear-based fruits. And nobody wants to eat that because it don't taste good. Whereas if we build a relationship, which is like building a house on rock instead of on sand, we build it upon love and trust, and that's the foundation. Our fruits are also going to be a lot different as well. We're going to have fruits that taste great and abundant and amazing for both of us to experience, right? So that's the main basis of it. And so the biggest thing that people start off with in their relationships, and this is usually based off of childhood trauma, right? So I learned when I started to go into these relationships in my business, primarily in my organization, I learned very quickly that I had a lot of childhood trauma that hadn't necessarily been processed. And it's not as if to say like I had a crazy upbringing in terms of my parents doing a terrible job or anything like that, because my parents did a fantastic job, right? So I just want to set the record straight, give them my flowers and credit right here. They did a fantastic job. But despite that, there were certain moments where I experienced childhood trauma. And this is why, if you're watching this video right now, you may be in a similar position where maybe you've not had the absolute worst upbringing, like your parents weren't necessarily drug addicts, or they weren't people who were totally absent, like you had them there. But there could still be some childhood trauma that has contributed to your unconscious mind, because ultimately the way that we operate is that we know that from psychology, 5% of what we think about and what we do comes from the conscious mind, whereas 95% comes from the unconscious mind, that unconscious operating system, what's beneath the surface that we're unaware of. And so if that's the case, then we have to make sure that we tackle the unconscious. And the unconscious is the thoughts, beliefs, memories, and everything that has been built up from our childhood, right? So if we're experiencing the childhood trauma, which is just pain that's stored from the past, that hasn't been healed, that hasn't been processed, then in these relationships, when we start to come closer with another person, the trauma can come to the surface, and it comes in the form of patterns, right? Control patterns. It comes in the form of patterns such as withdrawal. It comes in the form of patterns such as, projecting. Like, it can come in so many different forms. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to see beneath those patterns, see beyond them. And it starts off, as I was saying, we've got the immature relationship based off of attachment. There's a great book that I read a few years ago as well, and the whole book was about this theory called the attachment theory. And I think it's a proven concept now. But basically what it talks about is how in a relationship we've got two extremes, where ideally, we want to be in the middle. And this exists everywhere as well. Like, mostly in life, we have what is the law of polarity that exists all the time, equal and opposites. So there's masculine, feminine, there is the light and the dark, right? And so what we want is, ideally, we want to be in homeostasis, we want to be in perfect balance, because whilst we're in this state, that's where we experience the maximum amount of flow, the maximum amount of, you know, being able to be present and authentic. And so when we're on either extreme, this is when we come out of our core identity as to who we are, right? So the book was talking about essentially how there is people who are insecure, and one way they can be insecure is through being anxious. Another way they can be insecure is through being avoidant. So for myself personally, in a lot of relationships, what I found was that I was becoming avoidant. I was avoiding the tough conversations. I would only really have them when people would come to me. I was avoidant in that even when they would have those conversations, I wouldn't necessarily put my emotions forth, and I'd become more stoic, right? So this is how an avoidant person would move, but then there's the anxious person, right? And the way that they react is that they're also somebody who is going to be more loud and outspoken and be on edge and be checking in to see, like, are you okay with this and that? Like, they're always looking for these threatening signals that will signal to them that they could be abandoned again. Why? Because ultimately they've got this childhood trauma that stems from this fear of abandonment. And so when the person can truly be seen, when you can be seen from having this fear of abandonment, that's where you start to feel a lot more safe. And as you feel safe, you come closer into the ideal, which we'll talk about a little bit more as well, which is essentially where you become interdependent. Because on this extreme, this is where we're being dependent, right? And I'd actually say that both people on other sides have a level of dependence, but how it's outwardly displayed is that this person shows it. They show the dependence to the other person. And this opposite extreme of the person that's independent, they outwardly show that they don't have that same dependence, like they're almost trying to be deluded to it or deny that it exists. But the reality is that you can't run from the truth. Like, by you pretending to be independent, that's actually simply confirming that you haven't really healed from the trauma and you haven't forgiven to the point at which you can ascend. So you stay on this level over here, which is in the level of immaturity, attachment, and enmeshment. And so you might be thinking right now, well, what's the cost of this? Why not just stay attached instead of ascending to a higher level? And the best way I can describe it is, it's like, when this happens, you become enmeshed, you need each other. And it's like you don't necessarily even have the full control as to how you personally feel, because your feelings will be determined by the other person, how they act, how they move, and that will influence and govern your feelings, your behavior, inner state, and everything about your life, right? So it's so important that we can remain single first. One of my favorite teachers, who, if you're watching this right now, and you like my teaching, it's a lot of it is inspired by Dr. Miles Monroe. Got a few of his books over here as well. Great teacher. You can watch him on YouTube. He's passed away now. But one of the things that he really drills home when it comes to relationships that has always stuck out to me is he said something that kind of goes completely backwards to what you would think anyone else would describe. And that is that he says the most important thing in a relationship, it's not your togetherness, but the most important thing in a relationship is your singleness. And the reason he says this is because there's a difference between being lonely and being alone. So if we're being lonely, then that means that we could actually be surrounded by lots of people. And that's exactly what it was like for me as well, because when I was the most lonely, I actually had the most amount of people around me, which was wild to experience. I thought that I would be way more lonely when I was alone, but I actually didn't feel lonely when I was alone. Because the difference is that if I'm alone, then I don't need to have other people around me, it's just me. But if I'm lonely, then that's my inner state. It's like this being the fragmented self, the separated self, the one who hasn't fully integrated, so that they don't need anyone else. So like they don't have to have that level of dependence, and not just the unhealed, independent version of themselves. Right. So we've got the two extremes over here. There's the person on the left who is the one that is always looking to, make sure that the relationship doesn't dissipate. They're constantly afraid this person's going to leave me and abandon me, just like I experienced that abandonment back when I was younger from my parents or whatever. And so all of that sticks and it stays, but we don't realize it because it's part of the unconscious. It's beneath the surface. And the reaction mechanism that we tend to see from these people, and this was myself as well a lot, what I was finding was that I would start to overgive in relationships. What I was finding is that I was being selfless and calling it, righteous, because it was a form of martyrdom, is the best way to put it. I had this ego, which was my savior complex, because the ego exists on both sides, right? I've written ego in the middle over here to show that the ego exists over here and it exists over there as well. So just because you're being selfless, that's not the ideal state to be in. That's not the ideal identity to have. And it's not the ideal identity to have as well where you're being selfish, right? Because if you're being selfish, then you are just thinking about you and that's it. Like your whole life philosophy is that separation is what defines us. And you believe that by having that as your belief system in what you see as being a dog-eat-dog world, to only competitive, there's only so many winners and losers, etc. When you have that belief, you may think to yourself that, yeah, it's going to give me power. But ultimately, it's not. It's just a sense of power. Real power comes from all of this that we'll talk about in a bit. But on this other side, it's no better as well, as I was saying. Because over here, you're thinking that separation is an illusion. That's your mindset. So none of these are grounded truly in reality in terms of the main fundamental unconscious belief that exists. Because the truth is that the reality is an accumulation of both. Yes, we have separation physically, but energetically and spiritually, then we're all interconnected. There is no separation. Like if you looked at it from the outside, like from a space station, you looked at the planet Earth, you just see one ball. When you describe your own physical body, you don't look at a single person and see like billions of separate cells. You just look at one person. And so it all depends on perspective, on how you're viewing it. But both realities are true at the same time, right? So this is important to understand, because once you get this, you'll realize that, okay, on the one side over here, you've got this person who is what I would call they're enmeshed. They can't discern and distinguish between them and the other person. The other side, it is a form of enmeshment as well. They're also like in denial. But whilst you're enmeshed, then everything is conjoined like this. And you're not able to actually be two strong forces whole. And instead it's like two halves coming together. You know how people always say, this person completes me, or you complete me. It's like one of the absolute worst things that you can say. Because ideally you want to be completed on your own. You shouldn't need anybody else. If you're in a relationship, it doesn't want to be based off of need in that relationship. The only one that we want to need as human beings is God. Other than that, this just wants to be based off of what is it that we want, what do we desire? Because one of them comes from a place of scarcity and the other one is from abundance. And if we can ascend from scarcity to abundance, then this is where we're going to find that our relationships are going to be based a lot more on things like joy, love, God, trust, all of the beautiful things that we truly would want in a harmonious relationship, right? So, yeah, this is some of the stuff that we've got so far in terms of the basis of what is contributing towards your relationships where, you know, it's not healthy, it's not working. And you might find that like you're thinking about separation, you're thinking about leaving, right? But it might just be that there's some healing that has to occur. So you have a choice, which is either you're going to remain in the relationship with each other, you're going to heal together. And if you do that, then both of you can ascend. But the other choice is that if you're not going to heal together, then you heal separately. One person heals, the other person chooses not to. Whilst that happens, this person's dependency on the other becomes threatened whilst they ascend. And this is a big reason as to why as well, like, you know, you hear so many people who they start, you know, making content or starting their own business and they get a lot of pushback. They get a lot of negativity from the people around them, the relationships they once had. Why? Because their sense of self is now threatened as you're healing and as you're growing. And it works vice versa as well. So you can do it independently, you can do it together, or you can just choose that you're going to go into a new relationship and you're going to heal with that person. Because what you cannot expect is that just because you are going to come out of one unhealed relationship, one toxic relationship, that you can just jump into another one and that new person will solve the problem. No, that's not true. Why? Because ultimately, part of the reason for why you attracted that person that was also unhealed is because you yourself have got wounds that are still open. It's because you yourself haven't truly healed. And until you do, then you won't be able to attract and be with a person that is going to be fully healed himself, right? And so how this actually looks in regular life as well, because I did say I talk about it in business and in relationships. What I tend to find is that in the area of business, a lot of people will have what's called the shiny object syndrome. And how I view it is that the shiny object syndrome is just confirmation of healing that hasn't necessarily taken its full course. Because it's a similar attachment style where you have an avoidant attachment style to your business because you are in a relationship with your business. So what you're expecting is that whilst you're seeing the business and you're conscious of all of the downsides of the business, but you're unconscious of the upsides of that particular business. And so what then ends up happening is that whilst you're unconscious of the downsides of this model, or sorry, the upsides of this model, you're thinking to yourself through impulse, which is the distortion of reality, where you're now unconscious of the downsides of this new model or this new person that you can be in a relationship with. You will prematurely jump into that thinking it's going to solve your problems. And then maybe initially it's like, oh yeah, the benefits are really good. And it's like all, what's the word? Like it's all passionate and intense in terms of the feelings that you're experiencing. And it's essentially, what do people describe it as? It's, there was another word coming to mind, but the one word that I'm going to say is it's lust. Because lust is you being conscious of the value, but unconscious of the cost. And as that's happening, and as you're being driven by impulse, you're just going to jump into the next thing, thinking that it's going to solve all your problems when it doesn't. And so I was doing this not necessarily in the area of, I would say, like jumping from business to business, because I've always been loyal to my business. I'd say that as one thing. But where it was for me, and I think the loyalty in that aspect, by the way, it wasn't coming from a healed place. It's probably because I had more of an anxious relationship attachment style to the business, where I was seeing a lot of the upsides to the business and not the downsides, right? So I'd say for me, like where I had that lustful nature was in the area of like personal growth, self-development. And I became somebody who was just, a junkie of self-development in consuming lots and lots of videos and content to the point where I was practically addicted to buying these books and watching the videos, feeling like I needed the next strategy, tool, whatever. Don't get me wrong, like a lot of it was beneficial. I gained a lot of knowledge and information, but I didn't need any of it. At the end of the day, my business is very simple in terms of the actions that I have to take. But the appeal that was coming from that was, again, because I was unconscious of the downsides and conscious of the upsides. So this is important to understand, because there are people who they're quitting business left, right, and center. There are people who are reading lots of books and just not taking any action. And by doing so, they're not hitting their goals. You're not hitting your dreams, and that's not ideal. That's why we're making this video right now, so that by the end of it, like, you can walk away and you don't have to experience this any longer. You can actually go ahead and you can heal. I'm going to show you in a few minutes as well exactly how you're able to move forwards powerfully, so that you're not being disempowered all the time, and so you're not leaking your power out as well through going into relationships that are not serving you. So speaking about power, right, the one who is dependent, you may feel as though you're disempowered by the people over here, right? You may feel as though you're constantly being the empath, like you're caring about others, being compassionate, and everyone's like a narcissist and stomping on your plate. That's how you might feel. And so part of that reason why is because of your worldview. You just naturally might be more emotionally intelligent. Naturally, you might be more into energetics, understand waves and the vibrations of the universe and flow and things like that, more spiritual and feminine. Whereas on this side, you're probably more like somebody who is like, you understand the masculine and the physical, and you don't see yourself as being a selfish person. You're a competitive person. Like, you want to win stuff, right? And that's who you are. So chances are you're probably going to be watching this video if you're one of these people, because you will not be experiencing so much of the problem the same way that people over here will. The anxious people are usually like, yeah, we need to solve this problem fast because it's more urgent, right? And so I respect you guys, but ultimately I think if you're somebody who puts yourself into rooms where you are going to feel outside of your comfort zone, you put yourself into rooms where you're surrounded by people who are at higher levels than yourself in areas that you value, chances are it might be that sometimes you will start pedestaling people in those rooms. But if you're just happy to be in your small circle of friends that you've been with for the last 30, 50 years, because it makes you feel powerful or confident as the alpha male in the group or the alpha female, then yeah, you're never going to experience what it's like to be on this side. But ultimately what I'd say is that the relationships, again, they don't just have to be between person to person. It can be between you and business, you and company. So, the background that I've come in business is I've been in the business of affiliate marketing, network marketing, and when you're in that kind of business, I'd say that there's two extremes. We've got a person on this side over here who, it's like they see the company as, again, putting it on a pedestal. It's absolutely perfect. It's going to save me from being a terrible entrepreneur. It's the best business model in the world. The products are incredible. No downsides to them. Can't believe people call it, like something that has a bad review, doesn't work. And so you're so conscious of the benefits, but you're unconscious of the downsides. And then what ends up happening is, because of that, rather than you becoming more independent and being a partner of the business, it ends up becoming this weird thing where you're just staying as the fan or the customer, spectator. When in actuality, like the other extreme would be somebody who, they would never even partner with another company. They would never do a business where it's anyone other than themselves. Why? Because they are being totally unconscious of the upsides of being affiliated and associated with another company, right? And so that person may miss opportunities. That person may go all alone, even if it's harder. They may go the fast route. But yeah, ultimately, it's again this avoidant relationship that they have. And so the ideal is that rather than just trying to build a business by yourself completely on your own independently, the ideal is that you can build a business yourself and you have a business that's already existing and it works. And through collaboration, now you're able to have more synergy, more output, more productivity, more leverage, more results that you couldn't get by yourself. But if you just simply rely through dependency on your upline or your sponsor or your mentor, your company that you're affiliated with, and you don't actually create a business as though that business doesn't exist, right? And you're just like putting in the minimum, expecting that they're going to do all the work for you somehow, something like that. If that's the mentality and mindset that you have, then you personally, like, you want to becoming more to this side of the spectrum. And again, like what I'd be saying is that you can look at dealing with all of the outer fruits, or you can simply address the root. And what I'm saying is that at the root is simply about taking out the weeds, putting in new seeds of love, seeds of trust, instead of seeds of fear. And more seeds that you plant and start watering and nurturing and everything like that, eventually the fruits are going to be so much more different as well. And so I've been speaking a lot about what this new alternative is, where you're not being selfless or selfish, but you're actually being what we call self-full, right? You've gone from dependence and independence to now a reality which is an interdependent reality. And it's almost as if these two extremes over here, this whole experience, this is like an initiation into a life where there is a lot more abundance and trust and love and everything like that. So it's part of the journey, it's part of the story. If you've gone through this and you're thinking to yourself, like, why did it have to happen to me and everything like that? Well, I would spin it and reframe it as, no, this has happened for you. This happened for you so that you can become this person who is now a lot more integrated and whole, right? And so, you've got the two people that are coming together as singles, as whole people, right? Bringing the whole 100% to the game rather than just 50% and trying to complete each other. And this is coming from a place of security. This is coming from a place of self-control. And this is about authenticity more than anything. Because whilst we're being authentic, we're operating from our core identity, who we were truly intended to be, not just our manifested version of self. A lot of people confuse what it is to be authentic and what it is to just have your manifested self. Because people are operating from their authentic manifested self, not their true authentic core identity. What do I mean by that? I mean that you've got people who, they go online, they say that they're being angry and like they can't control their ADHD or whatever, and saying that the reason why is because that's just who they are. They're just being authentic. That's not true authenticity. That is you operating from a place of unconscious identity, unconscious self. But true authenticity is coming into your core identity as to who you really are. Not necessarily from just your values, which are your conscious expressions of self, but your meta values, the unconscious values that truly dictate who you are from your soul. Okay? And so this is where we want to be operating from in our relationships. Because a lot of people, it's like some of them, and this is what I was finding for myself as well. So it's not just me saying it about others. This is something I have to confess to. is that sometimes it's easy for us to, when we're on our own, to be operating from our meta values and being truly authentic from our core identity, right? But then in the presence of another person who we're either intimidated by, or we feel as though we can, or they're intimidated by us, right? When we get close to these people and we start experiencing pressure to perform, that's when it can become more difficult to remain as the core identity. And most people don't even realize and recognize that it's showing up until you point it out to them. And when you become somebody who's operating more and more from your core identity, you will see it so much in others. You'll be able to call it out of them as well and call forth their true core identity. Because that's what I've shifted from. Like, I don't call people out anymore for their behavior, their activity, or whatever. What I'm doing is I'm calling forth the core identity from the person because I know it exists within them. And if I can speak to that person, chances are we're going to have a much better connection than it would be when I'm speaking to the one who is trying to protect themselves, trying to preserve, and everything like that, right? So this person, again, like in interdependence, they're authentic. They have what's called healthy boundaries. And I'm going to show you on the next whiteboard. I'm going to show you what healthy boundaries really look like and how it evolves in the levels of boundaries too. So there's healthy boundaries they have. They're also someone who is empowered. Not only are they empowered, but they don't have a lack of power. They recognize that all power truly exists from within, and they're just expressing power and empowering others in their relationships. So they empower others, they're empowered. And this is somebody who has what's called balanced energy. What does that mean? It means that they have integrated both of these sides. So they have become somebody who does look out for themselves. They understand they have boundaries, but they're also considerate about others too. They're not just kind, but also someone who is nice. Like some people say that you have to be nice or you have to be kind. No, you can be both. Where you're able to give tough love to a person, but it's not just tough and it's not just love. It's both, right? That's what we can be over here. We can be balanced. And this is not just about spirituality or physics, but this is metaphysics now. Having that understanding that we have particles, we have waves, we have energy, we have everything all in one, right? So this is where we want to get to, because when we come to this place of interdependence, we experience more joy, we experience more love, we experience more God and truth. That's what we get to experience, right? And so what I wanted to touch on over here, and by the way, if you've liked this video so far, even before I jump into this next part, please drop some feedback, drop a comment, let me know what's been your biggest takeaway, your biggest gem. I always love it when I see the comments over here, just because it gives me ideas, inspiration for me to continue making videos in a particular area and topic, because at the moment, I am just throwing out there everything that comes to mind that I personally believe would be helpful to my younger self from 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, somebody who hasn't been through some of these things, and having a team, and maybe you will in the future as well. So what I love about doing the videos is that this one topic in the video, I know that the lessons from it will still be applicable in 5 years' time. They'll still be applicable like 100 years' time, right? It's great. Unless somehow we stop having relationships and businesses by then, but who knows? So, as I was saying, we are coming to the next part of the video, which is about boundaries. And so what I've found is that there's actually levels to boundaries. Now, if you don't know what boundary is, by the way, because until like last year when I started to have relationships with people, I'd never set a boundary before. I never felt like a boundary was truly violated. I didn't even know what a boundary was. And again, this is one of these things where you can read about it in books. Like I even had read about it in books before, but I never experienced what it was like to have my boundary to be violated like that, and to become aware. And so to start off with, to answer the question of what actually is a boundary, how I would describe a boundary is it's just a border as to what is the difference between your territory and somebody else's? It's your domain and somebody else's, right? And there is a distinct line, it's like an invisible line almost, that exists where most people, they have a particular boundary, which is why in the physical example, because we've got lots of different examples of boundaries. We have physical, emotional, mental, time, sexual boundaries, financial, digital, spiritual, energetic, and identity boundaries. So knowing that we have all these boundaries, it's like one example could be a really easy one to see. If somebody walked up to you and they're like this close to your face and they've just done it, you don't know who they are, whatever, you're probably either going to turn around and hit them or tell them to get away from you, right? Why? Because they've closed the gap in terms of the distance between you, and they've violated a boundary, right? Because the boundary may have been here, and they've violated the boundary by stepping across it. And so it's a lot easier to tell when somebody crosses a physical boundary because you can see it with your eyes. So if somebody crossed the boundary with you physically, then everyone around you could tell. Even emotionally, I'd say, crossing somebody's boundaries emotionally could be very easy to tell, because if a person's like shouting at you from across the room and doing it from a place of like anger and fear and aggressiveness, then other people who are empathetic may also sense that you've just violated that person's boundary, right? So sometimes they're easier to sense than others, but when it gets to the things like the digital boundaries or the energetic boundaries, then because some of these, like for the digital, for example, who teaches you about digital boundaries as to what's acceptable, what's not acceptable online? Because if you're somebody that just tolerates people saying anything to you online everywhere, then, maybe it's time to start setting some boundaries in place. And the need for digital boundaries becomes so much more important, especially when you are building an organization, you're building a business, because if you, for example, on Instagram have tens of thousands of followers and tens of thousands of leads, not all of those people can have access to your calendar. Not all of those people can have access to your schedule, your time. Not all of those people can come into your container, right? It's like you couldn't just bring all those people into your house, right? That's a physical boundary that's crossed, but there's a digital boundary too. So it's important to know the distinction of like, okay, who's allowed into the inner circle? And what are they allowed to say in the inner circle? What can they do? And it's not necessarily to control. There's a difference between enforcing a boundary with control versus enforcing a boundary with love and trust, right? Because a person who is doing it from a reactive place of control is trying to self-protect rather than actually just serving both them and the person in the relationship. One of them comes from a place of service, the other one comes from a place of control, right? So there are these levels to boundaries. Actually, before we can go into that, let's talk about violation, because I think this is going to be super powerful for you, especially if you're going to start communicating the boundaries that you have to another person. Or I think what this could be helpful for to a person right now is that if you feel as though you don't actually know in a relationship whether or not you're crossing somebody else's boundaries or whether your boundaries are being crossed, then this is going to give you the total confidence in understanding that. So the violation of boundaries is that you can either disrespect a person's boundaries, you can disregard a person's boundaries, you can manipulate a person's boundaries, or you can simply repeat any of the three. And when you're doing this is you violating that person's boundaries, which for them, the reaction that is valid for them to have emotionally would be anger. That is a valid reaction for them to have when you violate their boundaries. It's natural, it's ingrained within us. But what you want to be thinking of is, how can you avoid violating other people's boundaries? Ideally, like we don't want to go around upsetting people for no reason, right? But what we tend to find is that about 5% of boundaries that are actually violated are external boundaries, meaning people violating each other's boundaries. However, 95% are internal boundaries, where you're violating your own rules. You're not being betrayed by somebody else, but it's self-betrayal. Because you actually have these boundaries already, and you're maybe not keeping your own promises. You're breaking the self-trust and the self-confidence. That's what's happening for most people. They're saying to themselves, like, yeah, I'll wake up at 9 a.m. and I'll get out, I'll do a workout. And then they wake up and then still in bed at 9:15, right? And they didn't do any workout. So you continue doing that, you're going to lose trust over time, right? So then we have the actual levels of boundaries, okay? And the lowest level of boundaries this is where I was at in the beginning. I didn't even know what boundaries were. How could I even be conscious of what my boundaries were? So lowest level, we have unconscious boundaries. These are non-existent boundaries. It's not that the boundaries don't exist. Because if you're getting upset, if you're starting to feel resentment, then the boundaries do exist. But what it really is that these boundaries you are unconscious of. You're not even aware that you have them. You're not even aware that you can have them. It's like, oh, I didn't realize I was allowed to have boundaries. We didn't teach us that. And if you think about it, it doesn't really serve a controlling authority to teach you to have boundaries, because it then means that they have to surrender some control. They have to then mean that they have to almost surrender some power to you to enforce that particular boundary. So you won't be taught this stuff by your parents. You're not going to be taught this stuff by your teachers. Who's going to teach it to you? Most of the time, you're just going to learn it yourself, or you're going to learn from me, Uncle Mo. So, yeah, we've got the unconscious, non-existent boundaries. And after this, you can start leveling up in terms of your awareness, because the problem with remaining here is that people will step on your shoulders, people will walk all over you, people will take from you, to the point of which you have nothing left. You have no energy, you have no money, you have no time, you have nothing. And you simply owe to others, right? So that's what will happen when you have unconscious, non-existent boundaries. I don't recommend it. Ideally, you want to ascend, right, to even having what's called reactive boundaries. And reactive boundaries are where your boundaries have now activated. That's why we call them reactive. They have reactivated because they should actually be installed within us from as we're born, like part of who we are. It's almost as if we get desensitized to them. So now that they've reactivated these boundaries, your emotions are coming back online, and your anger is working for you again to signal to you when somebody has crossed the boundary. The problem is, when somebody has crossed the boundary, because you have experienced this intense emotion out of nowhere, it's like, rather than being able to sit with it and remain calm, you explode. And you start exploding out to other people, which, is more selfish because it's self-protecting. The problem with it is if you keep exploding to the people around you, then your relationships will be diminished over time. People won't want to don't like you, won't want to be around you, and you're going to have that particular cost. So we don't want to stay here. It's better to be here than it is here. Yeah. But there's higher levels, right? And the higher levels is when we go from reactive boundaries to now what we call assertive boundaries. Because assertive boundaries are now more proactive. And what's happening here is that, yes, the boundary is being crossed again. There's a violation that occurs. There's a delay that happens afterwards. Because now the difference is, rather than you reacting in the moment, you respond instead. Right? Because at the end of the day, responsibility is your measure of the ability that you have to respond to a situation. So now you're responding, and you're able to respond in a powerful way because you've calmed down first from the height of which you elevated your heartbeat, your adrenaline kicked up or whatever, started to get angry. but you didn't choose to act on that emotion. You didn't choose to act on that feeling. You delayed it. And that's powerful, because now when you come into having the conversation with the person, rather than becoming the feeling and being like, I'm angry at you, and so I'm going to act out of anger, what you can share with them is you can simply say how they made you feel and how that conversation can go. Because the amount of times that people come to me like, yo, what should I say to this person? And all I'm doing is I'm teaching them how to communicate and assert their boundaries in a respectful way. And my framework for this is that I start off, and to begin with, I always begin with apologizing to the person, right? Not to over apologize, just to apologize. Hey, I just want to say, like, right now, I'm sorry that I didn't say this earlier, or I'm sorry for making you feel this way, that you went and did something to me. So taking ownership and responsibility at the beginning. After that, disarms the person. And then whilst they're disarmed, when you go and let them know what it is that they did to make you feel the way that you've now felt, they'll be a lot more responsive to it, because you've acknowledged your part to play within the whole thing. And so after that, you go and you say, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, but I just wanted to express how you made me feel on a certain day. And how you made me feel was X, Y, and Z. I felt angry, I felt this, I felt upset. And the reason I felt this is because you did X, Y, and Z, which hurt me in this way. Now the person is seeing how it all ties together in terms of their action, your feeling. You're educating them on the boundary that they've crossed. And you want to make it clear as well. What was that boundary? Like, what was the problem? Because if they don't know what the boundary is, then it's just going to perpetuate and continue. So you're just educating them on what your boundary is, and you have to process that as well. That's why this time period, this delay is so important, because it allows you to process, like, what was the boundary that they crossed? Which one of these was it? So yeah, then we've got the communication, which then leads to prevention. The beautiful thing about this is that when we have more assertive boundaries, when a boundary is then crossed, in the future with the relationship, as long as you stay in the relationship, that is, the future relationship means that there'll just be less boundaries crossed and violated over time. And that's a win for everyone. So much better to be here than it is to be here. And I remember working with one of my clients from this year who, like, she was here as well. When we spoke on the phone, was that empath person in the beginning, was having their boundaries violated left, right, and center, all over the place. And she was reacting a lot, getting angry, getting upset. But this is not something to shame about a person when they started from here. That's to encourage. That's a win. Because now your emotions are coming back online for once. You don't want to stay numb and just let people walk all over you. But then she gave me a call one time and was like, yo, you will not believe this, but I actually finally set a boundary with someone. And I explained to them, did it in a powerful way. I was shaking, nervous in the beginning, but I could not believe the reaction was actually positive from the other person, because they were expecting the absolute worst. But usually that's not the case. When you sit down with them and you calmly educate them on just what the boundary is, they won't take offense to it. But this is offensive when you start reacting all the time. And in you being offensive, they will get defensive, which will cause a fight and an argument. Nobody likes to do that. But this will turn into a beautiful conversation, a healing conversation. And I can't wait for you to try it, because it's genuinely game changer. And then after that, finally, we have the mastery level, the pinnacle. The pinnacle level to reach when it comes to your relationships and your boundaries is what we call integrated boundaries. And this is where, when you have integrated boundaries, the violation occurs, but because of your ability to do some kung fu stuff internally, it's like you're able to almost do a judo move on them violating your boundary, so it doesn't affect you emotionally and you stay regulated. Because what I felt like it was for myself was that, if I was being honest, I felt like I was here when really I was here. I would act like outwardly that I was here, but really I was here. Because what was happening was people would say something, I wouldn't say anything back. I'd act as though I'm more peaceful and whatever, stoic, but it was affecting me internally. And I just wasn't expressing that because I thought I was here. But I became numb to my own emotions. But whilst you're actually here, it's more like, no, you can recognize that you should feel the way that you did, usually, or you normally would feel that way. But because of the reframe that you've now been able to apply to the scenario, rather than reframing it later on and forgiving the person, it's almost as if you never take offense in the beginning and you're able to reframe the situation whilst still protecting yourself in the moment as well. So it's more like a regulated response is what I would call it. And that's the outcome and effect of becoming the integrated being, the one who has truly healed and the one who is no longer on either one of these extremes over here. So yeah, final message to finish off the video is I wanted to talk about this a little bit as well, because I think the analogy is beautiful, but I was sharing with somebody else the other day, like when I started off my journey with my hair. You can see it right now, it's pretty long. We've been going for a good 6 years now, and it's wild to think, but yeah, 6 years of not cutting my hair. And the process is really interesting because I didn't know that this was going to be the case, but when I had the intuitive feeling that I was going to go and grow dreads, it was not like something I've ever planned or whatever. It was just, I felt the voice of God being like, yo, grow dreads, it will serve you. So I went in that direction. And as I did, I found that in the beginning it was beautiful. Like I had these sections of my afro, because my hair was usually an afro. When I was in school, my hair was like huge afro. But then as I started growing dreads, like my afro was like a baby afro, but it was like little curls, sideshow bob afro, that kind of thing. And it was the beginnings of what looked like a healthy dynamic. But then as things started to lock up more, because the process of doing free from dreadlocks is going from your hair being in an afro to like all knotted together. So it's like just lots of knots that are coming together. And my hair just became so weird at one point. Like I couldn't even describe what it was, but it was just like loads of different knots all in one, and quite a lot of it. So it went from like hair that was this big to then hair that was like really knotted up and tight to my scalp. And then I remember like one time we were in Italy, and I just felt the impulse to go from taking everything that had now come into this big clump and just start like pulling a little bit at it. And as I started doing that, I was like pulling, and one of them just fully separated. And it turned into this beautiful long dreadlock that just came out of nowhere. I was like, whoa, what just happened here? Like, it wasn't this long, of course, but it was the first time that it actually looked like a dreadlock. And I was like, whoa, this actually worked. Because before that, like, you know, they went through the ugly phase and everyone was doubting me. They were like, yeah, you'll never be able to grow dreads. Are you crazy? And things like that. I was just like, what's going on? Because my whole family had never seen the process. You know, my majority of the family on my dad's side, which is the majority of the family, all of them are from the Pakistani side. So none of them had seen somebody grow free from dreadlocks before. None of them knew that it was even a hairstyle that existed. And they were all just like, what is going on with your hair? Like, why aren't you cutting it? And then when it actually turned into dreads, some of those people were just like, whoa, cannot believe that it actually worked. That style, that process. So yeah, I just started like separating them that day. And that was like the first time that the dreads went from immaturity to maturity. And we've now got it to a point where, yeah, it kind of looks like they are somewhat manipulated, these dreads, because of how like separated that they are. But really, they're not like that majority free form, like 95% free form is what I would say, apart from the initial separation and everything like that. A little bit of crocheting as well, but very minimal, very minimal. And the whole message that I'm sharing here, sharing that story, is that it's like, I believe that process that naturally occurs with our hair, if we let it do its thing, the natural course of action for people who have the hair like myself, I believe that actually resembles the process in nature where our hair goes from, or not just our hair, but like life goes from chaos to order. And it happens in business where you're starting off, everything is chaotic, it becomes even more chaotic when more people come in. And everything is enmeshed all in one. Everything is all unified together, just like in that unhealthy relationship that I was talking about over here. But it's like a series of unhealthy relationships that are all stuck together like this. And then after that, the natural course of action is that the chaos goes to order, just simply through sticking the course and allowing for nature to do its thing. And so the degree of entropy, which is measuring the chaos that exists within a system, is dependent on how much you're able to, one, stay the course for as long as possible, but it's also about, are you willing to interfere to some degree? Not too much to which you create, more chaos, but it's can you actually get things into a place of synchronicity and alignment? And when you can do that, that's when you will have a much healthier relationship. You'll have better business relationships as well, because everything has now actually become whole, separate. And that separation is beautiful as much as everything is tied together as well. Still, to my head, there's no other separateness too. And that's what we want in our relationships with each other. That's what we want in our relationships in business. And that's how we'll keep everything nice and healthy. So, yeah, if you know that you've got some work to do, self-work to begin with, because it's a lot to take in from this video, and I appreciate you watching till the end. But if you know that now that you've got some work to do in yourself, becoming more self-aware, you've got some work to do in maybe having some conversations, uncovering what are your actual boundaries, your digital boundaries, your physical boundaries, your emotional boundaries. And maybe you've got to start having some conversations with people that you've been avoiding, and start actually educating them on what your boundaries are, and becoming more sensitive to the boundaries of others too. That will improve your relationships across the board. So yeah, I told you, if you stick around to the end of the video, you're going to get a ton of value, as always, and you're going to improve your relationship significantly, because this is stuff that, man, I wish somebody had told me this earlier, so that some of the important relationships in my life could have either lasted longer, or some of the ones that were toxic, I didn't have to experience the pain that I did. But what I'm grateful for is that everything happened the way that it should have, and we've now got this wisdom to share with you all, because I wouldn't have had this had I not gone through the experiences. So even if you've been going through it, then just remember that maybe it's not happening to you, but it's happening for you and for other people who you've been called to serve as well. So yeah, thank you for watching as always, and I shall see you next time. Peace and love. Take care.